Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Cinefile, the podcast celebrating cinema one film at a time. Each week, my co-host Jake Biller and I break down a film, discussing anything from mise en scène to scenes you missed. Today, we find out who is Spartacus. In 1960s, Spartacus. This was my pick this week. Jake, had you seen Spartacus?
Yes, I had seen Spartacus. I am Spartacus. No, I'm kidding.
Honestly, who isn't Spartacus?
Truly. Crassus. He is not Spartacus.
Crassus isn't Spartacus.
Can confirm Crassus isn't Spartacus. Yes, I had seen this before. It had been quite a while though since I had seen it, and I think I had maybe seen it once, maybe twice all the way through. So this is definitely a fresher watch for me. When we talk about epics, this is very much an epic. This is, I think, a good representation of that genre, both in in the areas it succeeds and in its shortfalls. I like this movie. I think if you like epics, this is definitely a bread and butter movie for you. It is far from a perfect movie. There are definitely things that I was like, come on, or like things that I felt could have been improved upon. And honestly, knowing that I say just like a month ago went and saw Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah.
Kind of having that in a frame of reference, even just from the runtime aspect, I saw some interest. It reminded me of that in an interesting way, which you would think, you wouldn't think, excuse me, that a movie made in 2023 about something that happened in the 1920s and a movie made in 1960 about something that happened in like
the 20s.
BC.
20s, yeah.
I mean, I think it's like 200s BC because it's the Roman Republic. So that's like,
that is true.
That is she's a while back there. It's the Republic.
Yeah.
So for some reason, like 200-ish BC is sticking out in my brain. The ancient world is not my expertise. I'm a history nerd. Ancient world is just
I'm a little bit more familiar with the ancient world, actually.
Yeah, Latin boy.
Yes. So what we should have done, at least for the last two films. So we did October Sky, which was my pick, and this pick are both films that I watched in high school for the first time, like in the building. We talked about how October Sky was something that I watched in health class and still have not figured out why. And this one was a staple of Latin. So I took 7 years of Latin. I took 4 years in high school and then 3 in college. But every year, Magister Perkins would play Spartacus during, I think, finals week, something like that. So we would watch like a third of the movie and then a third of the, because it really does kind of work as a third kind of film. And so I remember purchasing this film in like 2020, I think. And I just saw it. I was like, you know what? I have such fond memories of it, but I hadn't really watched it since Latin class. So I was excited to kind of revisit this. This is an epic. We haven't really touched on epics a whole lot. We're going to touch on that today. Obviously, we did 10 Commandments, and
yes,
and that is certifiably an epic from around the same kind of
that's
time period.
52.
Yeah,
it's the early 50s.
It's the early 50s. This was 1960. But kind of just jumping into it with some opening thoughts. You're right. This movie is long, but I think the biggest issue I have with it is that it's almost like the tale of two films. So the Spartacus we see in the beginning, and honestly, for the first like 45 minutes, really until Death by Soup, is well, yeah.
I sentence you to death by soup,
and not in the way you think. And so I would say that Spartacus is completely different than the Spartacus we see kind of running this rebellion and these guerrilla kind of tactics in the latter half of the movie. And so that to me is very, very jarring. And upon this rewatch, it just stood out a ton. I mean, we start with Spartacus kind of being, I mean, he bit, well, didn't he bit a guy's leg? It was
Yeah,
either a guy's, yeah.
Yeah, he gnaws. He tries to hamstring a guy, chew through his hamstring.
Is that a thing?
I
To
mean,
hamstring a,
to hamstring someone is to sever their hamstring. It's then, of course, become colloquially known as to hamstring someone is to cause someone
hold them back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to slow them down or cause them a disservice. But
Okay, interesting. But I didn't know that there were enough people chewing on hamstrings for that to be like a thing.
I don't think it's common to chew them. I think it's more.
It's only weird if you swallow the hamstring. You know, I don't know.
Oh my! Eating. We're talking about cannibalism this week.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, hey, it was the 200s BC.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. But like, what are your thoughts when it comes to this change? Because especially in an epic, it is so hard. We talked about this with the Killers of the Flower Moon review. It's so hard to have a consistent narrative through line.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, one of the biggest flaws, I think, or an interesting starting point for our conversation, is the fact that it seems like the tale of two Spartacus. Spartaci? Spartacus? Actually, technically, if it's Latin, it would be Spartaci, I guess, because it's a US, and the plural form, because that's a... So, welcome to Latin. The plural...
What is magister? Is that me? Does it mean mister?
Magister means teacher.
Magister sparrow.
Yeah, with magister sparrow. So if you have a US ending, that is that's the single version of a noun. The I would be, it's actually what a US would be masculine noun ending. But the I is the plural nominative. So anyway, that's not relevant in the slightest. But what are your kind of thoughts on the character of Spartacus himself?
So I very much see what you're saying, where it's very much, I don't know if I would go as far to say it's a tale of two different Spartacuses. There are very different Spartacuses throughout the movie, I will say, and it's very who Spartacus we start the movie as and who he ends the movie as is quite the change. But usually you want your protagonist to change throughout the movie. However, I think that this movie does a very bad job at showing how Spartacus changes, because it's just like it's just so jarring, I feel like, because you're right, at the beginning of the movie he is a slave in the salt mines in Libya, I believe. It's supposed to be Libya.
The Libyans. Sorry, Back to the Future. Anyway,
it's salt mines of Libya, and you know he's very heroic from the beginning in that he is resisting the oppression of his masters and his slave drivers to help. I think it was a woman. I don't know. It was over a 3-hour movie. I forgot.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I forget the first scene by the end. By the time I get to the end, and so, but I believe it's a woman who falls and she's carrying her load of rocks or salt or what have you, and that's how he gets in the fight with the guard, and then he's going to be executed eventually. But the Spartacus of the beginning he's heroic, but he's quiet. I mean, he really doesn't say anything.
Yeah,
for quite a while in this movie. I don't think he doesn't say anything really until we get to Bataius's compound or whatever. Bataius, portrayed by Peter Ustinov, which also 2 weeks in a row that we're doing a Peter Ustinov film, because he voices Prince John in Robin Hood from last week. So who knew?
And honestly, I can kind of hear it.
Yeah,
like I can kind of hear the John in the Bataius.
Robin Hood obviously comes after this movie, so
that is true.
But I definitely know you're right. I hear the sinews that tie the voices together. Anyways, but it's not until Spartacus gets to Bataius' compound, and I think it's when I think his actual first line is when they bring Varinia, played by Gene Simmons, they bring her to Spartacus's cell. I think those are his first lines, if I'm not mistaken. I could be,
if anything, those are the first lines with purpose
that mean anything,
yeah.
Right? So it's just he's very quiet. But then by the end of the movie, I'm getting bogged down here in the beginning. By the end of the movie, he's very heroic but very outspoken and bold and in charge. You know, he's leading this slave rebellion, but he's also very he's very charismatic. Not kind of, he is very charismatic. I mean, you see it in the way he deals kind of with the pirate guy that's supposed to bring him the ships, in the way he and Varinia interact, in the way he and Antoninus interact. There's charisma. There's that kind of characteristic Kirk Douglas charm there. He's smooth and maybe a little dangerous, but mostly with good intentions.
I really think when we're talking about this movie, you mentioned the charisma of Kirk Douglas. I think the only reason this movie works at all is because Kirk Douglas is the lead.
Mm-hmm. No, like,
genuinely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's able, because really Spartacus is kind of a broadly painted character. I like to say, painted in broad strokes. He's very atypical, or not. He's very typical. Excuse me. Archetypal. I was trying to say of the lead of an epic, in that he's noble. He's the leader. He's standing up for good or whatever. He's loud. But there's not a lot of nuance to him. There's not a lot of depth. I think that's kind of one of the places where this movie kind of falls short, is that we don't really have a fleshed out Spartacus. He's just kind of there really as a character for story purposes almost. It's very this movie is very kind of, I don't know how to say it, it's very it almost worships Spartacus in a way. It's very much him as like, this almost godlike figure that's come to save the slaves. And so there's none of that nuance, that kind of the dirtiness that make characters interesting to us and make us keep wanting to learn about them and keep watching the movie. But to your point, yes, Kirk Douglas's charisma is entertaining to watch, right? He very much carries this. So I would agree that he's why this succeeds.
Yeah, and what I would 100% agree with that, but I'd also say that when we talk about films and we talk about people carrying films, this is a great example of that. Because the story of Spartacus, and I told you I almost want to rename this film. I don't want to call it Spartacus, because it's the ideal of Spartacus, right? This is an idea. This is he is this archetypal, like you said, archetypal character. And so when you don't have flaws as a character, as you said, it's really hard to pay attention. But when you have this kind of ideal, right? Because I mean, slavery, it especially in Rome, there were a ton of, it was so commonplace, it was so normal to have slaves. And so they kind of dreamed of this idea of a Spartacus, somebody almost like a savior that would come in and rescue them from the bonds of slavery. And now, granted, one of the differences between Roman slavery and in like slavery in America is that I believe you could earn your freedom. I could be wrong about that. I think you could earn your freedom, but you also had a place of respect in the home.
Yeah.
Now, granted, we are pulling on knowledge that I haven't looked into in a long, long time. So if anything I say is incorrect, you're welcome to comment down below and be like, hey, that's not actually what it is. It's actually this. But so there is a difference there. But it's this ideal of Spartacus. And so it's really important that you have, when it's not about the character himself, but what he represents, that you have an actor that can steal the screen enough to make you still watch a three hour and 15-minute film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Kirk Douglas is a great example of that. Charlton Heston is another great example of that, right? Because we don't learn a ton about Moses. We learn what we know from the Bible, but we don't, and he is a flawed character, but we don't really get into the minutia of it. And in an epic, you're not going to get that.
Yeah.
And so you need to have something like a Charlton Heston. You need to have someone like a Kirk Douglas to really be able to carry a film with no real character substance.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like they almost seem kind of like action figure kind of roles, right? You know,
right.
It's someone idealized rather than someone realized, if you will. Yeah. Now, some of the other characters in this, especially once we get into the whole Gracchus, Crassus, Bataitus kind of whole dynamic. The squad, yeah. I don't know, like that is really where this movie picks up for me. And honestly, I almost wish we would have lost some of the exposition and started closer. Like I almost wish we didn't see Spartacus like start from like a slave in the mines and then like going through gladiator training. Or like I wish we could have condensed that, you know, because I feel like once we like really introduce Bataitus is perhaps the first antagonist that we meet for Spartacus. Well, I guess you could say the people that are trying to kill him in the mines. This is his first antagonist.
Yeah.
But I like as far as like named characters or like characters that feel important to the movie, Bataius is the first. But it's really when we are introduced to Crassus that we're kind of like, oh, this is like the big bad, because it's like when you see him when they're having the fight in Crassus and his favorite general and their wives come for lunch and they want to see a gladiator fight because, you know, who doesn't love a dinner and a show?
Right. Yeah. What are you having for dinner? Hamstring.
I joke, but I make a joke about dinner show, but that's really how Romans treated gladiator fighting at the time. It was like
sport.
It was really like sitting down with a beer to watch, you know, your favorite NFL team or your favorite college team play football on a weekend. But it's in that moment when Woody Strode, who plays the gladiator that Spartacus fights, when he doesn't finish off Spartacus and he goes to attack the box, or attack the onlookers, and Crassus. I mean, Crassus very coldly like kills him. Now, yes, you can make the argument that, you know, he's being attacked. It's a reflex or whatever. But Crassus almost seems to take like a little bit of enjoyment out of killing Woody Strode, I think. And so it's like really that moment that you're just like, oh, this guy's not good. This is a bad guy. Like Bataius is a quote unquote bad guy. We see him, you know, kind of.
Bataius is almost indifferent. His goal is his own safety.
Bataius is a survivor. He is a slimy survivor.
He's like Wormtail, like low key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with a better haircut. And at the risk of sounding like you better teeth, Wormtail's an ugly guy.
Facts. Big facts.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. So we aren't really introduced to the true main antagonist of this story for a significant amount of the film. And it's almost like we go into it not exactly knowing what are Spartacus's ideals, right? We have a character that essentially is mute for a significant portion. And while we see that he goes against authority, we don't necessarily see the conflict for a decent amount of the film. because the conflict, it really picks up, and it's Spartacus versus Crassus, and it's this kind of two different ideals of the value of slavery, but we don't even get that until after he kills, because he does it so coldly, and there's like blood that splashes up on his face a little bit, but it's so cold the way in which he does it. It's like, this is an inconvenience. He's an inconvenience. He's not a human.
Yeah.
And so
swatting away a fly, if you will.
Right. So it's really interesting that we have a movie where we don't really know the stakes. We don't really know kind of the purpose for a significant amount of time. And that, again, goes kind of back to the epic, where we are just telling a narrative and we aren't really getting into the minutia, the details of the different characters. And that also happens with, what is it? Valeria? No.
Verena? Verinia?
Yeah, Verinia.
Yeah.
Because we apparently have this romance, which the romance is essentially he's not just going to outright sleep with her.
Yeah.
They're
not just gonna get down like dogs, if you will.
Right. And so I guess he's endearing, at least in her eyes, because he doesn't just immediately do that, even when
he didn't rape her. Wow, what a great guy.
Yeah, we got the two boys upstairs, like looking down, like, what are you, chicken? Why aren't you doing it? And so we even see that with her character. It's like, what is her goal? We almost get her goal a little bit sooner than we get Spartacus's goal.
Yeah.
And that she's clearly fed up with having to be a servant slave. Mm-hmm. And be given to these people. But I still do not understand the relationship between those two, because again, with an epic, we're getting those broad strokes. We're not getting the screen time that we need with these two characters to really understand their relationship.
Right. No, I definitely agree. It's very just, how do I want to say this? It takes a very wide look at things, in terms of perspective on this movie. It takes a very wide sweeping view of it, hence why the genre is called an epic. You don't make an epic about a very small confined interpersonal story. It's about sweeping visuals, sweeping sound, sweeping story with grand ambitions, if you will. So an epic, true to its form, favors large action sequences instead of small, intimate character moments, right? Right. I think that's kind of why you've seen epics evolve out of favor. When you think of epics, you think of really the 50s and the 60s. That's kind of when the epics...
Ben-Hur.
Yeah, Ben-Hur.
Ten Commandments. Spartacus. Yeah.
Lawrence of Arabia.
Cleopatra. Which almost bankrupted the studio, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Wild.
Expensive.
But really... Well, okay, go ahead, yeah.
Well, just to finish this thought here, they've fallen out of favor, and and when you think of an epic, you think of something from that period, because as audience taste has evolved over time and throughout the course of movie history, we are drawn to those intimate character moments, and that's not where epics, especially this epic, succeeds. I would say that's where this movie fails almost, is a lack of intimate character moments that draw your audience in and make you care about these characters beyond just, this is my hero, this is my, this is the damsel in distress, this is the villain. Modern audiences, we need more than that. We want complex, dirty characters, because let's face it, we're all complex and dirty people, and we want to see somewhat of ourselves in the people we see on screen. And I would argue that only a very vain and non-self-aware person would say that they see a lot of themselves in Spartacus.
Yeah, if you're saying, hey, what character from
Yeah.
the silver screen is somebody that you really identify with. Spartacus. Okay, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I'm leaving. Never talking to you again. Yeah,
Exactly.
and it's kind of interesting that we watched this movie in between Killers of the Flower Moon and then Napoleon, both Apple films, both being released within about a month and a half of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting even kind of having this discussion on epics because it's reformatting in my mind my thoughts on Killers of the Flower Moon. Because I went in with the expectation to get the character moments. And we do have character moments.
Mm-hmm.
We do have character moments in that film, but it really is broad strokes kind of stuff. And the only reason I'm interested in watching it is Leo DiCaprio, Lily Gladstone, and Robert De Niro have great performances. Now, you don't think Leo's is as good as I do.
Yeah.
But
I think he's not
regardless,
given a good character.
yes. But then now we have Napoleon, which
Mhm.
neither of us have seen yet, but is coming out for Thanksgiving. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that approaches, because that really truly is an epic, if I'm not mistaken. Because we have the battle scenes, which we had battle scenes in this. Okay. Them marching,
Yeah.
Crassus's army marching on Spartacus's army, that was low-key like 10 minutes.
Oh yeah, they
Like,
really
it took forever.
Like, there was no self-editing in this movie whatsoever, at all. Like we saw, even when like they deployed, like Crassus's army like deploys in the field, like they go through like 4 different formations, and I'm like, okay, yes, this may be perhaps militarily accurate, but we don't need to see that. I mean, look at the Lord of the Rings. Some great battle sequences in there. I mean, the Gandalf charging in with the Rohirrim at Helm's Deep to save the day, and oh my god, where do they attack in the last one? Yeah,
that place,
Minas Tirith.
Yeah, Minas Tirith.
Mm-hmm. When Theoden takes his army to Minas Tirith, those are 2 pretty badass battle sequences.
Yeah,
you don't see a lot of military strategy there. I mean, it's literally just kind of lining up and charging at each other,
which is wild that's how it used to be. Like,
I mean,
all we do now is just bomb people and kind of have almost guerrilla warfare. And it's wild that we used to like line up in lines and be like, okay, now we can fight.
Right.
Which that is just wild. But I won't lie to you. I did fast forward through part of that. Like I kept hitting the fast forward button to see because I was like, okay, I get the idea. And also I need this movie to kind of be over. So I like kept fast forwarding, and it literally took so long. It took way too long. But I mean, we get a little bit of military strategy. We get, a little bit, but we have those kind of big sequences. And so those are memorable. And I think the reason why they were so popular in the 50s and 60s, kind of going back to that point, is because of the nature of media at that time, right? If you're going to a movie, you wanted to see something that you couldn't see. And so these big sweeping kind of epics, sword and sandal films, like you don't see that in every day. Nowadays, with the advent of social media and with being able to see a bunch of things in real time, there's a kind of, I would say, a waning interest, because you can kind of see that, or honestly, if you had the financial means, you could go to see different landscapes, different things. And so that's why I think another reason why the epic kind of fell out of favor.
And to add another layer to this, think about what business-wise, what is happening in Hollywood in the 50s and 60s. You're trying to find the answer to television, right? Because television is bringing stories into people's homes, right? And so the big question is, what's going to entice people to leave their homes and go to the theater and watch a movie when they can watch stuff at home on TV in the comfort of their living room? What can't you get with the little 4x3 TV that's, like, I'm not kidding, this big? a grand, sweeping, wide angle, big action sequence film.
Yeah. And that's
That
still the
was,
case today.
yeah. You go to the movies to see something for scope.
Yeah, intimate character moments can be watched on your couch.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, and that's why people are more interested in digital and waiting. Like, you have to have a reason to go to
Right.
the movies. And so that's another interesting reason why we're kind of bringing this up on this Advent. I've said Advent way too many times in this podcast.
It's not
already,
even the Advent season yet.
Right. But with the introduction and proliferation of streaming, you have to have a reason to get out of the house. And so it's really interesting that we're talking about this, because this was the answer to television, giving us a reason to get out of the house. And I had people that I served in Killers of the Flower Moon. When was the last epic before that? Like, it's been a while.
Yeah.
So I had Killers of the Flower Moon audience members saying, like, I'm so glad I saw this in the theater, even though it was painfully too long.
Yeah.
And that's probably going to be the same thing with Napoleon. And so it's interesting. This is kind of a pivotal point. This idea of an epic is a pivotal point in film history, and it's kind of coming back. And so I'm glad we're talking about it in between these two epics that are being released this year.
So it's interesting talking about how, kind of going back to what you said at the beginning, how you see kind of like almost a few different or two different sides of Spartacus in this, or a few different stories. So this movie had two different directors.
There you go. There's the reason.
It's credited as Stanley Kubrick is who directs. It went into production with I wrote his down his name. Is it Anthony Mann? For some reason I had Michael Mann in my head. Anthony Mann was the original director, and Kirk Douglas, in addition to being a charismatic leading man, was also very, very much in charge on a lot of sets, especially this one. And he and Anthony Mann clashed early on, so he fired Anthony Mann and hired Kubrick.
Was he even a producer?
I think he's a producer on this. I don't know. He got him fired. Probably just was like, I'm going to quit if you don't get rid of him. So they got rid of him.
They'd be like, crap, then we're screwed.
We are screwed. So they brought in Kubrick. Kirk Douglas wanted Kubrick to come in. They worked together on Paths of Glory, which I believe is 1957. I know it predates this, but Kirk Douglas enjoyed working with Kubrick on Paths of Glory, and so he brought him in for this. It did not necessarily go well. They had their clashes too, especially because Kubrick is very hands-on.
Yes.
And very controlling, and I think Kirk Douglas thought he had kind of thought of this as his movie, and he wanted control of this movie. So I think you can see even just some tension between what the director's going for and what the performance Kirk Douglas is giving. I think you can see some of that there, and also the cinematographer, which this actually won 4 Oscars. One of them is best cinematography, and Russell Meddy is a cinematographer, and like he lasted for like maybe a month with Kubrick and then walked off the set. And Kubrick micromanages camera departments notoriously. He did because he shot some of his own early stuff, and he was very controlling and about how he wanted shots to look. And so directors of photography didn't necessarily enjoy working with him all the time because he was so micromanaging. But yeah, Russell Meddy walked off the set, but he still got the Oscar. He was still credited with it, even though Kubrick basically was like, okay, I'm shooting this now too.
I don't know how I would feel about that, to be honest with you. Like if I like, I would be proud of my work. And so if I'm getting an Oscar for not my work, I think I would low-key be pissed. Would I take it? Yeah, but I think that would frustrate me.
I don't know how much of this Russell Meddy shot and how much he didn't. I do know, as far as the two different directors, the only sequence that Anthony Mann did that stayed in the film was the early stuff from Libya, and he might have done some of the work at Bataius' compound too. I can't remember, but I know for sure he did the very first scene in the salt mines in Libya. That might have been it though. So
Wow.
Yeah,
That's wild.
that's why he's not credited. He doesn't receive a director's credit on this movie, whereas Russell Meddy, I have to imagine he shot a fair bit of this to still receive the screen credit.
Well, and I also think it's interesting because when you think of Stanley Kubrick, you don't really think of this movie.
No, he Kubrick very much tried to distance himself from this movie because he didn't have like complete total control. He didn't have, he was brought in late to the project. He didn't have final cut, I don't think. I mean, no director had final cut approval really at the time. It was still kind of coming out of the studio system. Especially Epics, the studios were heavily involved because they're sinking a lot of money. I mean, this movie alone had, I think I read, upwards of 10,000 actors. I mean,
that's wild.
It is. But I mean, you see the scope of the battle scenes, like you can see where there's 10,000 people. But the studios are seeing so much money into these movies, these big grand epics. They obviously want to have more control over the end product. So I'm pretty sure Kubrick didn't have final cut on this. He was, like I said, clashing with Kirk Douglas a lot of times on set, even though Kirk Douglas was the one that wanted him to come and take over directing. So
irony 100.
Yes.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, honestly, because the production design, there's a very familiar look to it, especially with epics of this time period, and especially with like ancient history. And there's something endearing about it, at least in my eyes, because it's clear, especially in the Senate, that they're just in a room. They're just on a sound stage. It's very clear, but yet there's also something about the use of Technicolor in this and the way in which it looks, the vibrance, that I'm almost okay with it not looking super realistic. It's almost looked kind of like stylized. But it's so funny that as somebody that kind of will harp on things not looking correct, that I'm very much okay with the production design here and just in general.
I think there's a part of that. One, continuing the conversation from last week, I think there's some nostalgia in it. We both, I know I'm much more the classics nerd than you are, but we both have an appreciation for film history, and so I think for people who have an appreciation of that, I think there's the nostalgia to it, and there's an appreciation of the craft, right? Epics are known for their production design, like you said. And so appreciating the craft, especially when you know that like none of this is real. It's almost think of it like going to see a stage play almost. Like you appreciate the setting and like the set pieces more because you know it's not real. It's trying to recreate something that's real. And so there's almost I think an artistic appreciation in that respect of like, okay, I know this isn't 100% real. Like my brain knows that this is on a soundstage, but it's close enough it could fool me. And there's like, I don't know, like there's an acceptance of that or an appreciation of that. Because when you know it's not real, someone went and made it for this specific purpose.
Right. Which that's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
Kind of moving into Rosebud and Thorn, Jake, as always, I'm passing it off to you. What are your Rosebud and Thorn for Spartacus?
Roses, I'm going to give one to cinematography and one to production design, both two big hallmarks of epics. I think when you talk about where this movie succeeds and the success of epics of this period, both of those things, I think this movie does very well. It's shot very well, and like we just talked about, the design of how the look is very good. I appreciate that, so I'm going to give roses to both of those. I'm going to give a rose to Laurence Olivier, who
Crassus.
played Crassus. I'm going to give a rose to Peter Ustinov, who plays Bataius. I'm going to give a rose to Charles Laughton, who plays Gracchus. We haven't really talked about Gracchus
No,
that
we
much.
haven't.
Very much Crassus's antagonist in the Senate. They're two kind of bitter rivals, and we see their relationship and their kind of jockeying for control, really, of Rome play out through this kind of microcosm of dealing with the slave uprising under Spartacus. It kind of makes sense that they would play Olivier and Laughton would play kind of two enemies in the same field, because these are two of Britain's best actors of the period. Olivier is like considered one of the first great Shakespearean actors, and kind of bringing Shakespeare into the 20th century, if you will. But Charles Laughton also had a long career as an actor, both on the stage and the screen. But they were rivals as well. They really hated each other, and things got kind of icy on the set, I heard, between the two of them.
That's legendary.
They did their scenes and not much else together. So
maybe that's why they were so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, they really, as far as like best performances for me, it's Olivier, Laughton, and Ustinov. Those three, and like just seeing how they interact really with each other, even, I think, is where the movie's the best, and it gives us their best character moments. Is the interactions between those three characters. So I really appreciated that. I'm also going to give a rose to Tony Curtis, who plays Antoninus. I think Antoninus is an interesting character, and is very. I would almost like to have seen this movie from Antoninus's perspective, or a movie from Antoninus's perspective. It's not an epic if you tell it from his perspective.
I agree,
but I think he goes through quite a bit of change throughout the movie, almost in a Luke Skywalker-esque kind of going from wide-eyed innocence to kind of hardened realism in a way throughout the movie. So I think he's a very interesting character, and I think Tony Curtis plays him very well. But I'm going to say this may be a hot take. Spartacus. I just I understand why he is the way he is in this movie. I just think this movie is much better if you give me a character that is just more interesting. You know, this, for a movie that's based on true events, and there was this real Spartacus, and there was a slave uprising towards the end of the Republic, and that, you know, I'm not well read on my Roman history, but I know that kind of plays into the kind of downfall of the Republic, or the beginning of the end of the Republic. And for this being a real person, like, he feels like so much like a myth, a legend, like you said, the legend of Spartacus. He feels almost like a superhero in a way, that he doesn't have flaws, he doesn't have weaknesses, he doesn't have a grittiness or a dirtiness to him that I think would have gone a long way to lend his character to be more interesting and more compelling, and keep me interested, especially in those early sequences when, you know, we don't have our heavy hitters of Olivier and Charles Laughton. So I'm going to give a bud to him. I'm going to agree. Varinia is a bud too, just because I don't understand their relationship, her and Spartacus. I'm seeing moments, and the moments are very different from each other, right? We progress. We go from one scene when, you know, they're not really, it's kind of this lovers from afar kind of deal, and then the next thing they're like very much in love, and then the next thing, like, she's having his baby, and it's just like we're moving from these moments to moments and making big leaps in their relationship, and so that, I think that's kind of frustrating. And then the thorn is, it's too long. I mean, I'm a big stickler about watching a movie in one sitting. I know we do not share that aspect. I didn't watch
Not
this.
necessarily.
I didn't watch this in one sitting. I had to take a break. Just because I mean, like, because it's long and because also there are some boring parts to this. Like, there's no self-editing mechanism here. It almost feels like every scene that was written was shot, and every scene that was shot was put into the movie. There was no
Yeah.
one to say, like, do we really need this? Can we cut this faster? So I guess in a way, I'm also going to say the edit is kind of a thorn, because it's just like, there needed to be condensation in the story.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. For me, roses, yeah, the big three guys of like Olivier, Laughton, and what was Bataitus? Peter
Ustinov.
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 Ustinov, yeah, Peter O'Toole. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
Different
Could
epic.
you
Different
imagine?
epic. Yeah, I think they really command. They're the most interesting characters in this, and so I think they really command the screen. And I definitely have to give roses to them. I I would also agree that production design is a rose. I think it's just lavish and really cool. And really cool. Cinematography is good too. That'll get a rose. And I'm gonna give Kirk Douglas a rose, but Kirk Douglas, not Spartacus.
Okay.
I think he brings a really good performance, but there is something left to be desired with his character. Kind of moving on to Buds, the Spartacus character and the Verenia character are both rough. They're rough. It's like Verenia seems like she's there to be there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like there doesn't seem to be anything that makes her special other than the fact that she carries his child.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's just something missing. There's just something missing that, especially in an epic. I mean, obviously, I again go to the Ten Commandments, and I think like Moses doesn't really have, like, obviously Moses had a wife, but there isn't a whole lot of stuff with Moses and his wife in the Ten Commandments. If anything, it's more him adapting to being, somebody that lives where he does, instead of in the palace. So I would say that I just don't feel the romance there. And that is definitely a bud. I think there's potential. I think the story lacks focus. And so that would be a bud for me as well. I think there's potential for a really interesting story, but it really does lack focus. I would say I would say that the runtime probably is the biggest thorn. And you're right. Like, I will take breaks when watching a movie. Now, if I'm going and setting aside time to go to a theater, I don't take a break, obviously.
Yeah.
But if I'm just kind of like, I'll maybe go and pause and do some laundry or something else, and then kind of come back to it. And this is a movie that really kind of does need breaks. It really does. So I really wish. You know what? No, the story's gonna be a thorn. I really think it should have been tighter. Like you said, the edit, but also just, what are we trying to tell? What is the focus of this? Because if your focus is the character of Spartacus, and he's like the second most underdeveloped character in the movie, we have an issue here.
Yeah.
So I would actually move that to Thorn. Now, kind of moving into who we think we are, it's clear that we both think we're Spartacus, because we are Spartacus. So we don't even need to do that.
Okay, bye.
Who would you say I am?
I'm going to say you're Antoninus. I think, when we're introduced to him, you even texted me about this. He is a magician and a what? I can't remember what he
Singer of songs.
Singer
He's a singer of his songs, and he goes, "Oh, do you do anything else?" I juggle.
A juggle. I don't know if you juggle. I know you do sing songs.
I do,
but also,
and I got that Riz magic. So,
oh my gosh, Just when I thought we weren't going to talk about rules.
I know. I had to drop it in there.
Um, he also the scene when he's doing the magic tricks and he gives Spartacus the egg.
That was savage.
That was savage. And I was like, savage. You would be one of those magicians, like you would be a magician, you would be a comic magician. Like
100%.
You wouldn't just do like straight like, and for my next trick, like you would do magic to play pranks on people.
Yes, and it would be glorious.
Yes.
Yeah. So, no, the prestige doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
If we're that's the throwback right there too.
There you go.
Yeah. I would say that you are Gracchus. Purely because
for
you love the Senate. No.
I am the Senate.
Okay. Have you ever heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? I thought not. It's not the story the Jedi would tell you. But you love the Senate, and like anytime they were just chilling in the Senate, I was like, this is so you. This is just so you.
I did like those moments.
Yeah, I know you did, and I didn't. But I don't know. And just at the end, him kind of like giving them their freedom, and it was really stand up, and you're a stand up guy. So I definitely thought of you with that. Moving on to final thought.
If I can say, put it this way: if there were a character I would want to play in this movie, it would be Gracchus. I would want to play Gracchus. Mm-hmm.
And I probably would want to play Antonidas. So there we go. Moving on to final thoughts. Jake, what are your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I'm glad we revisited this. Like I said, I hadn't seen this in a long time. To probably go back on the shelf for a while. I'm not necessarily always drawn to.
Do you own it?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't own it. It's, I think, a good example of what an epic is and what an epic isn't. So I think from an academic historical kind of perspective, it's a really fascinating watch on that aspect. I think there's a lot of good performances in there. I think obviously you see Kirk Douglas's movie Stardom come out, even if not he's not given the most the juiciest of characters, shall we say. But if you like Roman history or you just like epics, I think this is really a movie for you. But yeah, it's not a perfect movie by any means, but I enjoyed it. And
yeah, for me, I think this movie is a classic epic. It's not going to be for everybody. The runtime really is a struggle, and it's okay to pause it. Go use the bathroom, go do something else, and come back. You're absolutely right that this is the like archetypal, like everything good about an epic you see here. All the epic flaws you see here. So it's really this is not a movie I'd be like, oh, if you want to be entertained, like through and through, you watch this movie. No, I wouldn't say that. But if you want to watch something significant from a different period in Hollywood history, you want to be more well-versed in older films, I think this is a watch. This is the quintessential leading man kind of saving a movie that is low-key boring with Kirk Douglas. There are great performances. The production design is really cool, but this isn't a movie that, this isn't a date movie. This isn't like, oh, hey babe, let's watch Spartacus. So I would recommend it for its historical value, but I wouldn't say that this is a must see. But the real question is for you folks at home. Have you seen Spartacus? Are you familiar with the legend of Spartacus? Let us know your thoughts, your review, your rosebud and thorn down in the comments down below. If you like this video, hit that like button and ring that bell with the subscribe button to get all notifications on upcoming content. We still have plenty more films for you to watch through the end of the year. Make sure to follow us on social media. Follow myself, follow Jake, follow Cinefile. You see the links right there. For Jake Biller, I'm Ben Sparrow. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you back next week. And Wale. Wale means goodbye in Latin.